welcome to Take Time. I'm your host, Patrick Marlett, and today let's compare the taste of two cocktails. In front of me today, I have two cocktails, one modern and one classic. The classic being our SARB065, and our modern cocktail being the SSA345. Now, I'd been asked ever since I did the SSA review to go ahead and do a comparison with the older version of the cocktail time, or at least one of them. And as we know, there are three classic cocktail times. But as we all know, only one of those original three cocktail time designs went on to create a legacy for itself and turn into what is the now Presage cocktail line series. Now, while the SRPB series of the cocktail time, that being the date and time version of the Presage lineup of cocktail times, would have been a more fair comparison to our SARB065, I wanted to compare the more premium version of the watch to our SARB, as I believe it offers a more compelling comparison. One, both of these watches cost about the same amount of money, right in that $500 region. Two, the SSA variants offer a whole host of features that were never present in the previous models, so that alone, to me, is a more compelling comparison. But thirdly, I would just suggest you get the SARB065 over the SRPB, mostly because the SARB is a classic and I think it's going to become a collectible. But two, the 6R movement is technically a better movement, although they're both sort of operating off of the same initial caliber. I think the 6R15 with its 10 hours more power reserve is just a better offering in general. And as with all reviews on the channel, as you guys know, I like to start with the bad and then move on to the good before giving my final verdict on the timepieces. Now let's start with my first bad note, and I'm actually going to refer to both of these watches in this instant, but as we commonly think of dress watches, we widely regard them as timepieces that are generally thinner, something that can fit under the cuff. Both of these watches failed to meet that mark. I think, in general, a good thin scale dress watch is 12 millimeters and under. Both of these watches are just a little bit bigger than that. The SARB065 is about 13 millimeters, while the SSA cocktail time is nearly 15. And we can actually see the scale of these two watches side by side, and you can see how much thicker the SSA cocktail time is as compared to its older brother. Now, while they're both manageable in scale, they fail to meet that requirement to me as a dress watch of being a little bit on the thinner side. So it's not going to wear as comfortably under a cuff or a suit if you're wearing this to work or on any sort of special occasion. However, I have to say that this definitely wins that battle. It is indeed the thinner of the two dress pieces, and it at least tried to manage being more of a dress watch in that, but I can't see how they couldn't have accomplished creating two thinner watches. I have to imagine that Seiko did this by design. However, I do have to say the thickness is a bad note for both of these guys. Now, while I didn't want to emphasize on this in the video, as I wanted to compare the two heads of the watch predominantly, I do want to state that with the leather strap options you receive with these two timepieces, the SARB isn't on its leather strap, but the SSA is on its leather strap. And both of them are adequate for the price. Now, this isn't necessarily good or bad, but I have definitely received better leather straps from other companies and Seiko itself in that $500 region. These are just adequate, but between the two offerings, I have to say that the SSA's leather strap is just a little bit better, so it's nice to know that moving into late 2017, 2018, Seiko is paying attention to the quality of the leather straps they're offering with these watches. I think that one is a little bit better. However, I will say that the clasp was a little bit better on the SARB. I don't know why, but it managed to be more wearable, whereas the SSAs, if you watched my in-depth review, you'll note that the curvature on this clasp for some reason tended to dig into my wrist and made it just a little bit uncomfortable. So between the two, they're just okay offerings. Again, you're sort of going into these purchases for the watch heads. I know if you're like me, you probably have a different strap for it anyways. And they're both nice 20 millimeter lug widths. So, options are completely out there. Now, both of these cocktail times offer the same chassis. These are both cocktail time chassis, albeit this newer model is slightly bigger, as we stated previously. However, there are certain key differences with the aesthetic I would like to highlight here. Now, these are neither good nor bad things. I think this is all a matter of opinion, but I will state that I find the overall aesthetic of the SARB to be a little bit more appealing. And let me get into some of those changes now. When the new cocktail time range came out, everyone was gushing about this larger crown, and you can see the difference as I put these two side by side with one another. I have to say, this is easier to grip, so ergonomically it's more sound. Hand winding on both of these is perfectly adequate, but I have to say, the crown on here between the two, if either one agitated me more, it was this one. Although it is aesthetically more pleasing, I found this one easier on the wrist. I also prefer the grip of this. It's not as easy to grip, but it feels better on the wind. And between the two, I just prefer this option more. The signature on the side of the crown is nice on both of these models, but again, I prefer the original crown more. Now, as we take a closer look at the dials of these two cocktail times, you'll notice that there's another key difference between them, that being the hour markings themselves. The original watch had segmented hour markings between the 6, 9, and 12 o'clock position, and you can see them here, whereas the newer variation has completely full hour markings. I have to say, I am a bigger fan of the overall aesthetic of the newer dial faces. I prefer having those hour markings completely full. They remind me of like ice shards in a cocktail glass. They're just more evocative of the theme of this watch as opposed to the previous iteration that has these segmented ones. It doesn't completely fall into the theme as the newer one does, so I'll have to say that I prefer this model's dial face construction and say that is a good point towards the theme of the watch. Now, the SARB065 is the only model of the original variations that came with this dial layout and setup. They all did feature some variation of the sunray finish. However, the SSA and the SRPB models, there is a much larger array of options, and I think the finishing on these dials, the overall look of these dials, is actually a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So another good point for the SSA. I think the dial itself with the hour markings and the dial look is just better. But specifically as we compare the espresso martini to the cool cocktail here, there's just so much more depth in the coloration and overall style of this dial face, whereas this just has one or two notes of color in our studio light setup. You'll notice that this one has a slightly more nuanced range of tones. You'll have blacks, grays, even browns as we look at it, hence the name Espresso Martini. And the whole series of cocktail watches nowadays have really, really nice diverse color options. So again, great point there. One point, however, that I will give to the SARB065 is the literature on the dial. I'm not a huge fan of the enlarged Seiko logos on these newer watches, and they're actually doing this with a wide range of Seikos now. Let me go ahead and move these hands so you can see what I'm talking about, but you'll notice that the Seiko logo is actually enlarged on these newer models. I'm not quite a fan of how tall and how large the Seiko logo at the 12 o'clock has become. I kind of prefer the subtle sizing of the original logo. I just don't like that change overall. I think this is just a little too much in your face, whereas this has, again, that subtlety to it, to where it isn't, like a key feature to the dial. It's more of just reminding you that you're wearing a Seiko as opposed to saying Seiko loud in your face. I'm not a fan of the overall scale of that, as well as the added presage text. It feels a little unnecessary. I think we understand it's part of the presage line. If it just said Seiko automatic, I would have been fine. But with how large that Seiko logo is, I would have preferred it just said Seiko up there, because there is a lot going on with these SSA models. What with the power reserve, and of course the made in Japan text and the extra bit of literature down here with the raised date wheel. There's just a lot going on with this dial face. I would have preferred just the Seiko logo here, whereas this has a nice balance to it. I like that rule of three they've applied here with the text. you just have the number of jewels, automatic, and pretty nice italic font, and the smaller Seiko logo. Less distracting, much more appealing. You can appreciate the dials finished this way. However, they both get points in my book for being aesthetically beautiful. I think the Cocktail Time series, by and large, is one of the nicer looking Seiko range of watches. So if you were interested in getting a dress piece, I think any one of the Cocktail series would be great for you. Their dials are just phenomenal. Now from here on out, I have mostly good notes about these two watches. So let's start with the Hardlex on the front. Now, I wouldn't put it as a bad note that they're using Hardlex, although people kind of expect sapphire crystal on a watch if it's going to be $500 these days, so I'll state that it could have been sapphire crystal. However, I love the dome on both the original and the newer Cocktail Times. I just love the overall aesthetic, the bauble they've created with these watches with that crystal. It's just a really, really classy look for a dress watch and is extremely appealing. The Cocktail Time case itself is an extremely comfortable case on the wrist. The SARB065 is just one of my favorite everyday watches. It's so easy to pick up and wear because of how comfortable that case sits itself on your wrist. You know, the case back itself doesn't jut out or protrude too far from the body, and the lugs do a fine job of meeting the back end of that case and your wrist. So very, very comfortable wear, and the same goes for the SSA variant. Although, again, it is just a little bit larger, you're made more aware of it on the wrist, it still wears very, very well. Now, while I still have the SSA Cocktail Time paired with its original strap option, I'd like to say that another good point with these two Cocktail Times is that they pair so well with a variety of strap options. The simplicity of both the case and dial face designs on these watches allow you to pair them with a variety of different straps, especially the newer Cocktail Time series with its range of colors. But when you have this silver blue tone dial of the SARB065, I find it wears well with any leather strap pairing I've put it on, and I particularly like it on this one. It kind of changes it from a dress watch to a more casual timepiece, and I like that I can do that with this watch. It's almost like having two watches in one in that regard, and due to the 40mm width of this watch, it's so versatile in that sense as well. You know, it doesn't feel like a traditional dress watch, which I would say is in the 36 to 38mm range, or even smaller for some people. Because of its 40mm scale, both of these watches pair really well with a variety of straps. The last good note I'd like to mention is that both of these watches offer exhibition case backs, so you can take in the movement. It's Hardlex crystal, but through that, you get to see the Seiko movement inside. And I know a lot of people like to admire the engineering behind their watches. Now, while this isn't a necessary feature, it's great that they offer it to you. You know, it doesn't hurt having it there. And if you are one of those individuals, you are now able to take in your movement. So thank you, Seiko. Now, the last major point of comparison, and one of the reasons I actually prefer the SARB065 over the SSA and the SRPB Cocktail Times, is the movement. Now, these newer models utilize one of two variants of the 4R movement, while the original Cocktail Time utilizes a 6R movement. Now, while the vibrations or beats per minute are the same at 21,600, the sweep is going to be relatively the same. The power reserve on the 6R15 is boosted by about 9 hours, as opposed to the 41-hour power reserve on the SSA model. And you can actually see an extra mark just past the 40-hour mark here on the power reserve indicator, stating that you have 41 hours of power left in your watch. Now, I have to say, while I like how the power reserve was executed here, I prefer the plain face dial of the original. And while I do like the date wheel at the 6 o'clock, I find the overall design of this dial face a tad too busy for my liking. So again, I prefer the date window at the 3 o'clock with the SARB065. But referring back to the 6R movement in the SARB065, that extra 9 hours made a world of difference for me from day-to-day use. Now, I don't know why it is, but as a user, switching between timepieces, I found that when I went back to the SSA, more oftentimes than not, I did have to wind it back up, set the time, set the date. But the extra 9 hours on this SARB somehow managed to make it so that whenever I decided I wanted to go back to this, it was already wound, it had accurate time, and the date was set. Again, this could just be me as a user, or maybe I was just so excited to wear this, I was wearing it more frequently than I realized, but being able to pick up a watch and go is a fantastic feeling, not having to set the time or date should it have a date on it. So props to the 6R movement for the 9 hours more power reserve. And with that last statement, I'm sure you guys can already guess which one I think is the winner between these two in our comparison. I feel every comparison deserves a winner, so I'll just give you my personal opinion. While I enjoy the overall dial option choices and dial face aesthetic of the SSA models, I love those full hour markings. I love the date wheel, raised date wheel, I should say, at 6 o'clock. Overall, I find myself enjoying the SARB065 just that much more. And here's the thing, if you're going to go out for a cocktail time, if you just don't happen to prefer a silver dial dress watch, then maybe go for the SRPB or one of the SSA variations. However, if you wanted something that's an instant classic, that's definitely going to hold its value in case you don't like it, and is one of the most jaw-droppingly beautiful watches on the market under $500, you really can't go wrong with the SARB065. I mean, this timepiece is so phenomenal. I can forgive it being just a little bit thicker in scale than the average dress watch because it wears so well. And for me, in my day-to-day life, I wear this casually anyway, so it doesn't matter if it fits under a cuff. And I actually quite like this smaller crown. I think it just presents the watch that much better. There's so much to like about this timepiece that if you wanted to jump into the cocktail time series, I think this is the way to go. At any rate, guys, if you found my opinions useful or in the least entertaining, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a little something like this. If you have friends, forums, or groups that were interested in the SSA cocktail time or the SARB065, maybe share this video with them, especially if they're on the fence between these two options, the premium SSA versions and the original SARB, because I definitely think they should go one direction, but both of these watches have their merits. So again, if they're on the fence, this video should hopefully be helpful for them. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you're new around here, I do these videos twice a week in much the same format. I do interviews, reviews, comparisons now, discussions, and vlogs. So if you like this kind of stuff, then maybe join us here. Again, my name is Patrick Marlett, and thank you for the time.